First, I introduce myself. This is the panel that we co-organize with Swiss Asian Chamber of Commerce and the Caspian Week, together with New Silk Road Institute, particularly focused on the cross-continental relationship from the geopolitical economic perspective. And I am the professor from the Erasmus University, the Netherlands, also the Associate Dean of Rotterdam's School of Management. I will quickly start introducing this topic. As we already know that this year is actually the 50 years of anniversary of the World Economic Forum. And the theme of the World Economic Forum is always talking about the stakeholder. But for the 50 years, it seems really difficult to transfer from the stakeholder perspective, actually from the shareholder perspective to stakeholder perspective. So there is a large gap between what we really want to do and we are actually doing, which is called we are aiming to sustainability, we are aiming to the UN's SDG 17 goals, but at the same time, we have to follow the capitalism, we have to follow the market-oriented system, we have to always remember that in 3 years, we need to give the return to our shareholders, we have to always think how can I improve or changing our consumer behavior. So from every layer of this society, something going wrong. It's not going wrong in our mental, intellectual perspective. It's something going wrong between the relationship of our mental and behavioral perspective, which we always call that we aim for something, but we behave different things. And globalization has been called for more than 3 decades because theoretically, we always say that globalization and international trade very good for both developed countries and developing countries in terms of the product, in terms of information, in terms of the labor exchange. But recent years, you already think that globalization has a semi-mixed function because it also provides some of the job losing for the developed countries, and it's also caused a hate crisis between developed countries and developing countries. So we are moving towards the track that we are far away from our original motivation. And it is also part of our human beings' weakness that we desire too much, and we desire power too much, and we have this hate crisis, which is a topic of 2020 that emerging in every one of us. So this panel, we're talking about this because technology will bring us together, will actually destroy globalization. We don't need to continue our global value chain, manufacturing chain in order to have global competitive advantage. Because of the technology, every company, every human being can represent themselves and can have local competitive advantage, which means that globalization probably will disappear. Is that good or not? And it's already happened between the biggest economic power, China and the USA. So based on this, we'll continue to discuss following the last session. So in this session, I have very esteemed speakers who is a thought leader in this area. And first is Dr. Caspian Etter, who is actually the head of the Delegation of Trade Agreement between China and Switzerland. He's very prestigious expert in trade agreement. If any country wants to get the free trade agreement with China, Switzerland always the reference to look at. So I'm very much looking forward to hear Chris' opinion. And second is the Professor Dr. Xiang. He's actually the founding dean from CKGSB. Probably most of us don't know the CKGSB. I will give a brief introduction. China is large, right? State-owned companies also large, but China's majority GDP contribution actually from the private companies. China is most entrepreneurial countries in this world. and the most contributed by private firms. And Professor Bing Xiang's school is actually educating the most leading entrepreneurs in China whose company value contribution is about 50 to 60% of China's GDP. So then you can imagine how powerful he is. I'm really grateful he's here. And sometimes if you want to deliver a message to Chinese economy, you don't need to deliver to Chinese government, deliver to him. It's very powerful. And then actually the third panelist, we invited the president of Pakistan-China Economic Corridor, but because of the visa and logistic issues, he cannot be here. So I have to ask the moderator from the last session to pretend that he's speaking on behalf of him, but actually he's speaking on behalf of Swiss side. Dr. Urs Lustenberger, he's a lawyer. He's also the chairman of the Swiss Asian Chamber of Commerce, and he will talk about his opinion and his experience about this topic. And then next is Toxin Low. He's a senior advisor of EUTEC from Zurich and Germany. He's a very, very knowledgeable person that I always think, how come he's not doctor? He should give an honorary doctor from one of the universities. I'm very much looking forward to hear the latest update from the Toxin Law about the technology relationship between EU, Europe, and China. And then the last but not least, we have Igor again from the ABB Power Grids, because actually he's sitting in this panel, but last panel there was a little bit logistic issues. So you have to speak again. Okay, let's quickly start the panel. I will first give the floor to Etter and talk about, please tell us what is your opinion of generally first the BRI and the New World Order, and what is your first advice to Switzerland and China how to deal with the first stage of China-US trade agreement, because this trade agreement has 8 chapters, but in the end, it will influence Europe very much.
Thank you very much, Ying. You're charging a heavy burden on me, particularly commenting on the world order. I mean, this is a very pathetic term. In my view, the world order is an endogenous result of many influences: political, economic, technological, nature, natural environment. So, I mean, it's an order, but it's a rather spontaneous order, I would say, in spite of the fact, of course, that there are major powers who have more influence on the so-called world order than others. Let me pick out 2 recent developments. One rather encouraging, I'll start with that, to keep you staying. And then I will also address a rather more worrying aspect, which of course has to do with what you mentioned in the beginning, namely the increasing fact of unilateral or bilateral trade agreements or efforts to come to conclude such agreements which are not always successful. But this is the rather encouraging aspect. I mean, the players, also the big players, are still talking to each other. I mean, the most recent example is this Phase 1 US-China agreement, which is encouraging. I mean, we're all aware that this has probably a lot to do with the situation in the US, the existing president running for office again. So he has all the interest to do deals, which will hopefully be productive, not only for the 2 parties involved, but for the world economy altogether. There are other examples. I mean, the USMCA, the follow-up agreement to NAFTA, seems to have now been concluded. There are negotiations ongoing between the US and Japan, in spite of the fact that TPP will now continue without the US, which is anyway also quite encouraging that the TPP countries, minus the US, are striving for a very large trade agreement anyway. Then the EU is negotiating with Mercosur. There's RCEP in Asia, which could be a very big thing, even if India, for the time being, as we learn, is a bit more hesitant to really join. But these are quite encouraging developments in spite of all the danger, I would say. Now, what is a bit more worrying is the development in the WTO, which, as you know, the World Trade Organization, which is sort of the umbrella rule of law organization for world trade. And world trade has, of course, a lot to do with international investment flows also. And last December, unfortunately, the appellate body of the dispute settlement system of the WTO is not operational anymore because the US refused to join the consensus to nominate new members to this appellate body, which is sort of the Supreme Court in WTO dispute resolution mechanism. This means this body is now down to 2 people and the quorum is 3 people, so they cannot take decisions anymore. And this is, sounds rather technical, but the implications are rather practical, because this means that disputes decided by WTO panels, and there are many ongoing panels, there were many panels in the past, and in spite of all the criticism directed to the WTO, many countries, including the US, make use of this mechanism and very often are on the winning end. Sometimes they're on the losing end. That's normal in such procedures. But now these panel decisions risk to end up in a vacuum, because as soon as a losing party appeals such a decision on unfair tariffs, on whatever behavior which would not be in conformity with WTO rules, the appeal would go to the appellate body, but the appellate body cannot do anything about it because they don't have the quorum anymore. So this means these decisions cannot be enforced anymore, and which again most likely will mean that the parties to the disputes will not anymore feel to be bound by these decisions because the appeal is not going forward. So this means that the rule of law, so to speak, of international trade and investment rules will likely become more fragmented, because if there are disputes, the parties will try to resolve them either unilaterally, which is not a real resolution, but just a power play, or they will try to resolve it bilaterally, which is maybe a second best, but as I mentioned, which will lead to the fact that the rule of law will become more fragmented. More fragmented trade legislation around the world means less legal security, and I do not have to remind the audience that diminished legal security, of course, is bad for investment, is bad for trade, is bad for economic development, so is bad for the peoples around the world. I somewhere read in the introduction to the panel that we should also present solutions. I mean, I don't pretend I have solutions, but what I would like to say is that around the world, particularly, of course, leaders of the big players should recognize that economic nationalism is a short-term illusion at best. I mean, in the end, all parties, including the bigger ones, tend to lose in a world where the rule of law is weakened. So this would be my message for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You pretty much touched the point of rule of law is actually weakening in my opinion, rule of people is actually collapsing. So I really want to hear from Professor Bing Xiang. You're the school that's really educating people, executive entrepreneurs. How would you educate those people to be the leader and future leader to actually give the world a better rule of people and the law?
Well, firstly, thank you for having me here. And there are a few points I would like to share with you. Actually, when I did a talk in DC 209, I expressed my key concern, which I called imbalance of development models. What I mean by that, when Ms. Thatcher studied the neoliberalism in 1979, followed by President Reagan in 1981, and by Deng Xiaoping. So I think China, US have embraced neoliberalism more fully than many other economies. So in my argument, I think China, US economically have become the most capitalist country on earth. Because in China, we don't have universal health care. We only cover the education of 9th grade. We don't have universal pension system. No unemployment insurance, the Gini coefficient, a measure of income inequality, second only to Brazil. If we go by governmental data, still 0.467. So domestically, China, US have a serious problem income wealth inequality. Externally, China, US collectively putting too much pressure on Europe, which is socialistic in nature. So that's what I call the imbalance of development models. If we don't have a balance in that regard, it's going to be difficult for any politician to sell globalization, despite the fact it is good. Okay, that's very important. If we just talk about globalization, you will not fix the problem. To me, that's far more fundamental than just globalization per se. So globalization has become a scapegoat for all the problems we see, and a key source of this economic nationalism. So this is point number one. And point number two, the WTO. Well, when China, US had different views about reconfiguration global trading system, when President Obama was TPP, TTIP, essentially new WTO without China. And China started with Belt, Road, RCEP, and many, a new experimental trading zone started with Shanghai and many other things, And especially after President Trump took over the power, his American first. When you have a largest economy, say American first, and I think we may be already in the era of post-WTO, whether you like it or not. It's very important. U.S. is indispensable nation. When the U.S. saying anything like that, doing anything like that, it's already post-WTO, whether you like it or not. I think we're in the era of bilateral deals, trilateral deals, or regional deals. I think the global deals like WTO will be way off decades later. So you see a flood of bilateral, trilateral regional deals. I think it's high possibility for China, Korea, and Japan to get together with ASEAN to form a new trading bloc, with the EU, new NAFTA, and RCEP, all of that in the forming. So I think we're already in a new era, and I think and thirdly, regarding this, I was here, my myopia of government, and I would call it collective myopia of humanities. What I mean by that, you look at the political system in the East, or West, whether it's liberal democracy or authoritarian. I look at the business system, East, West, no long-term incentive whatsoever provided for our political and the business leaders. 10 years is nothing for humanity. China, we have 5,000 years civilization. 300 years, roughly a dynastic change. Every 300 years, we have a dynastic change. Rather than business cycle, we have a dynastic cycles, So when you don't provide any incentive for our leaders to really care about long-term future of humanity, that's going to be a problem. Especially today, we have so much technology 200, 300 years ago, okay. Today, we have so much leverage, so much technology, but our whole incentive system, roughly the same. 10 years, we call long-term. You know, in business school, we teach present value, discounted cash flows. $1, 100 years later, discounted 10% into today's dollar, virtually nothing now, okay? So we generate one generation after generation of really myopic business leaders. We potentially can spell the end of humanity if we keep going like that, you know. And then I don't have solutions to all those problems. That's the reason why in 2005, we were the first business school to incorporate humanities into the curriculum of business schools. I mean, at least the history, philosophy, religions, you know. And then in 2008, we were the first business school to have a required module for our EMBA students, 6 days social work. Required, not elective. You have to do that to get a degree from our school. And 2018, we started with a social innovation. We would like to bring the business, government, international organization, NGOs together to focus on 3 issues: income, wealth, inequality, diminishing social mobility, and the sustainability. 3 of the issues we think we can contribute, okay? So right now, social innovation is required module for all our degree program, all, not just the EMBA, all our degree program. And then there's some sort of experiment we have tried since all the way to 2005, right? So I'll stop now. I can talk for 3 days, okay, thank you, yes.
Thank you very much. I want to continue ask you one question, because you are the first school in this world introducing humanity into the executive education. Is there any consequences?
Yes, because I could not change the political system. I could not change the business system. By seeds of humanities, at least you have some of our students look at business issue a bit long term. Let look issue the historical way, not just the present value of discounted cash flows. And also it is important for them to compete with compassion, empathy, not winners take all, not winners take all. And also to me, the single most important challenge for re-emergence of China as a superpower is really what I call the value connection, value connection. And then humanity is essential for that value connection, not the technology, not marketing, not just finance. And then so there are many, also I want our students, many of them are super rich, you know, including Jack Ma, our most famous alum is Jack Ma. But, you know, many of our students are already very affluent. It's very important for them to live enriched life, not just a rich life, and maybe enlightened life if attainable. So, and also the sense of humanity is essential for good corporate conduct. Not just SEC regulation, not just CSRC regulation. That's the pressure from outside. So those are many of the reasons why we did that. And then I think it's definitely the right thing to do. Yeah, you cannot solve all the problem. You got to start from somewhere. You know. So, yes.
Thank you. May I kindly ask that corner of people to keep quiet and then stop talking? If you really want to talk, you can go downstairs. We have a space to talk. But right now, it's a panel discussion, so I really expect you can give a little bit of respect to our panelists who fly thousands of miles coming here. Thank you. The next is Dr. Urs Lustenberger. What is your opinion from legal and economic business perspective?
Well, you know, after these previous speakers, they stole much of my thunder because they have, first of all, pointed out what really bugs me the most, that the WTO system doesn't have an appellate court anymore, which basically makes it defunct. It's now a free-for-all. Every country can do whatever they want. They can abuse all the rules. And if you want to go and take the rule of law and take any remedies, you will be stuck. So the existence of the WTO is now futile. It's a talking place where you can do the 5,000th round of the Doha round, and where you will never find a conclusion. So where you can sit together and at least in specific blocks can discuss what in those trading blocks you will do. At least you meet each other. But as a WTO, it doesn't function anymore. So to me, that is reality. To me, it's a pity, because I am chairing the Swiss Asian Chamber of Commerce because I believe in global free trade. I believe that the world is better if goods are moving fast and easy from A to B. I think the development of the world will be better. I believe it's a better way of creating people that come out of poverty. It's a better way of trying to also distribute values if you're interested in doing that. But it's a very democratic way in doing that. So I'm a big believer in free trade. And I'm, to a certain extent, a bit sad that global free trade is probably on its way down. I like the interesting thought of Professor Bing that the term globalization and all the discussion that comes with it is often used as a scapegoat for underlying problems. And always when there are terms that are not clearly defined, when they are fuzzy, and people start to talk about them, the visions and solutions and ideas that they come up with, they're also fuzzy. They are bad, usually. So the world would need to start defining the terms better, use the same language, learn to communicate about the same things, and not just talk in little snippets that you can publicize on Twitter, where you can convince with a motto someone for 15 minutes, and then have a following that lasts maybe half a day, and hope the next day everyone has forgotten that the underlying problem you have not dealt with. You see me projecting a relatively pessimistic view. I think the world and these big topics has been hijacked by fast-moving technological news, and I believe the world would deserve better. We would deserve thoughts to be clearer defined, visions to be clearer developed. And if you do that, I would hope the world would come to the conclusion that global trade and global free trade is a good and it's not a bad. It would help me to get this pen cheaper. It would help me to get this boot cheaper. It would help me to spread my ideas clear, and it would hopefully also help to spread the truth clear, because currently what is being spread is not the truth. It's the opinion of a pressure group. So we are opined by from various pressure groups. I can't tell the truth from fake news anymore. And so I just walk through the world and listen to things and deal with it in my own private filter way. But I don't know anymore if I'm right or wrong. And that saddens me. And it saddens me even more for my children. Because what will they do? They have even less of a capacity to deal with whatever gets into them. So, ending it on a positive note, at least we live in a country that still believes in free trade. I hope, and this country being Switzerland, I hope we will be able, through discussion rounds as this one, we will be able to open the eyes and the minds of a few people, and I hope we will be able to move forward to use technology in a positive way. Currently, it's probably partly used in a positive way, but also partly used in a not so positive way. And with this, I think I want to end it.
You talk something similar to Donald Trump fake news.
Thank you.
You know, Professor Xiang mentioned the solution from, not solution, but actually the effort from the education sector. As a lawyer, where to start? Where is your hint to start from? to reach your belief?
Okay. This is a very, very heavy question to a lawyer because if you look at how the law in the Western society is built up, then initially the most important aspect of the law is usually the Constitution. And the Constitution defines the relationship between the individual and the state, the government. Because the government has to have a reason why it is the government, why it is allowed to rule, why it is allowed to punish, why it is allowed to collect taxes. And on this Constitution, all the other laws are based. And if you now look at modern society, you come to the conclusion, my usual interaction with the state is not so big anymore in the Western world. My daily interaction is much bigger with my employer, or much bigger with the large company. And so there is a line of thought in me that says we should rebalance the Constitution. We should have companies and rules about companies in there, because some of these companies are more powerful and affect my life more powerfully than my state. Because my state, my government here in Switzerland, they keep quiet. You know, they don't observe me every day. If I fulfill my duties, it's fine. But some of these companies, they observe me every day. They know every little dirty secret about me, and they do with it whatever they want to. So in some ways, there would be rules needed to deal with my relationship with some of these very, very powerful companies. They could be food producers, they could be data collectors, they could be my shopping mall that knows every little move that I do nowadays. So in that respect, coming back to this, what should we do? I think we should do a basic rethink, like a reset button, and say these traditional rules, the traditional fabric of how we define the laws should be rethought. I'm not saying I know the answer and I don't have the solution, but I think the world is ready for a basic remix. And we are in a time where these remixes could be done and maybe should be done.
Yeah, thank you. I think if it was me, I would suggest all the lawyers, all the legal education students should start learning technology and data science. Because currently every one of us carrying capital, which is data capital, technology capital. We are not in the past century, 1950s, that property is capital, but every one of us, every data we we create is capital. So everyone is very rich in this house, that means. And then from the technology perspective, how to define the new constitution, how to use properly technology, how to develop a moral agorism would be a biggest question. I would give this question to Toxin Law. Maybe you can give us some of the inspiration, insights.
Not sure if thanks very much, Ying. I'm not sure if I'm able to give any inspiration, but the reason I'm not a professor is I dropped out of school. Very simple. And I decided to pursue my own education, the real world education, and I was lured by money. I became an investment banker in the City of London. But I've been covering technology, mobile communications, since the early days. In fact, in '87, when we were still in the analog environment, when the mobile phone was a brick. We weren't even close to 1G then. We're moving to 5G. But let me just start with the technology, and because something has really opened up recently, and I just noticed Huawei is a few blocks away from here. We're going to see a fracturing in what I would call a leapfrog technology it's a leapfrog technology. 5G, where it's implemented, is going to redefine the world in which we live, communicate, interact. I hope not go to war, but I hope never will that happen. Perhaps make peace. And this wouldn't have happened without 4G, so while we take these things for granted. So there's going to be first thing I want to mention is there's going to be a bifurcation of technology, whether we like it or not. And this bifurcation is coming because there are two unnatural bedfellows. The US, with the #1 country proposition, and China, with its very well defined, very well articulated 2025 Made in China program. These two actually are not, as I said, natural bedfellows. Of course, my next question is, where is the largest trading bloc in the world, the EU, going to stand in all of this? Now, while we talk about all this, just want to go back to the Belt and Road Initiative, because we are dealing with this right now. Don't forget, there's 6 corridors in this BRI. We just tend to extrapolate a few lines. And it's going through terrain we're not familiar with, where there are issues with food, sanitation, and water. I'm not even talking about electrification yet. And by the way, electrification is going to be 50 to 60% all the capital expenditure that's going to go into BRI. So note that's going to be the case. A third of that's going to go into transportation, which is also natural. The one that's moving fastest, that's attracted the most investment for now, is Pakistan. The Pakistani corridor, partly because of geostrategic reasons, has moved very fast. There's some that are going to be clogged a bit. Maritime routes will get into certain disputes, particularly in the ASEAN, the South China Sea area. So it's going to be a very lumpy, don't think of it as smooth Silk Road. There's a nice railway line that goes from Chongqing to Duisburg, which now, thanks to our Gotthard Basis Tunnel, has linked it right up to Lombardy, or the ports of Italy. So we do have the basis of actually quite a few channels. But within this corridor, we're going to have technology issues, human resource issues. We're going to have financing issues, because unlike the expansion of, if you like, in the earlier phases of I used to work for a Japanese bank, and I was head of privatization. We, after the US, we were the biggest, Japan was the biggest provider of funds for privatization in Europe. We at Bajwa, where I was head of privatization, underwrote the entire UK water privatization. That is, and there was no political backlash at that time. So I just want to remind you that these waves have happened before, and China is now the emerging power here. Now, tech divide is very interesting because we're actually at the cusp of a next wave. 5G is just an enabling platform. Don't get too obsessed with 5G. What's happening is processing power, the cloud, and machine learning have improved exponentially. In fact, we won't even be talking about Industry 4.0 anymore if you look carefully at what's going on right now, if you really get into the guts of it. We are moving well beyond just simple, if you call it, dual track loop, feedback loop, what you find in an Airbus autopilot. We've moved way beyond that. We are going to see really a divide, firstly the divide coming from the clash in technology between two superpowers, two super players, and then we're also going to see a digital divide between rich nations, the haves, and the have-nots. I think that's really very interesting. In Switzerland, we're going to be very lucky because we'll have the 5G network across, other than in some of the more mountainous regions, but we're a wealthy country. Many countries will not be able to afford anything quite close to this. There will have to be enabling technologies. Now, how has China solved it? Don't forget that part of BRI is space. I've actually become very interested in space recently, and China has integrated and incorporated space as part of Belt Road Initiative. So it has launched a satellite for Ethiopia. It is providing SATCOMs to some of the countries along the BRI, because the question that arose was, before you even have any integrity of the system, how do we communicate? How do we get materials? What are the logistics, etc.? How is that all happening? How is China engaging with the rest of the world? It's engaging in a rather unconventional way. I would say it's patchwork and it's piecemeal. So I think this digital divide is going to be a big topic. The tech divide is going to be very interesting. I am not suggesting that both are going fully their own ways, because at the end of the day, they feed off each other. And so it is going to merge in some areas, separate in other parts as well. So that's my 2 cents worth of.
Thank you very much. Let me ask you a question. 2 days ago, European Commission issued a decision that all the countries need to use European telecommunication infrastructure product rather than made in China product, like Huawei product, even though the price is much higher, the efficiency is much lower in order to build the 5G infrastructure. It seems very much against to the free market, but of course EU has its own concern that for the national or regional security. What do you think of this decision?
That's a very tall order. That's a very tall order, because many of the components in the core actually have China in the value chain. And one of my earlier thoughts was perhaps we could shift by having deeper joint ventures between the two largest European players, and I only want to talk about this in a European context, which are Ericsson and Nokia. In fact, Ericsson, don't forget, was in China in 1890 already. I mean, and they have a joint venture with in Nanjing. I think, I'm not sure whether it's Nanjing or another city, but they've been there for decades, producing equipment, doing R&D, etc. So China is already pretty much embedded through joint ventures. In fact, it's Europe that's been going there as well, because European companies do not have the critical mass of a hinterland to manufacture any of these components at any competitive price. So would you pay 3 times, 4 times more for your, I would say, I wouldn't call it 5G, because we're not going to move to 5G straight away. You know, you're not going to afford it. I just want to touch on security. The reason there are security concerns, there definitely are, but the pressure is not on Europe head on. It really is on the Five Eyes. So Britain is affected. New Zealand, Australia share a common intelligence platform, and that must not be underestimated. And don't forget that New Zealand was one of the first countries to bar Huawei from getting involved in the infrastructure. The biggest thing that's happening is chips and chip design. There is a leapfrog happening right now, which people are not looking at. They've looked at the phone, they've looked at content, they've looked at all of that. They've looked at the providers, they're too obsessed with social media. But chip design and chip miniaturization is leapfrogging. We're going to, McKinsey have said that the technology might get ahead of us right now. And I think that's precisely what's happening. And that's the trade war, because these things are fed also into the military complex in both countries and in other countries around the world. That is key. But you know, we live in a very, very interrelated world. And I always like to give this as an example. Hurricane Katrina, the monitoring of the destruction caused by it was one of the biggest disasters in America. It was all done by a Pakistani satellite. And that satellite was launched by the University of Surrey. That was a company that brought this satellite up into orbit, and it was providing all the data for the emergency services in the United States during Katrina. So I just want to show you how interconnected we are. And you mentioned pen, Urs. A pencil, I think, is a product of 30 countries or so, your basic pencil.
Okay, thank you. Let me quickly move to the next speaker. Not yet. To the next speaker, Igor. You represent ABB, and ABB is kind of covering all the keywords of our panel: globalization, technology, BRI, New World Order. I've been joining many times of ABB event in Davos. It's always mentioning that technology will not replace human jobs. And also, when I go back to China, even in my hometown, second-tier city, in a very secret corner, I also saw ABB. So ABB is everywhere, really globalized. And currently facing the technology dispute and also the trade dispute, trade war. What is the situation in ABB? And what is the concern and challenge and your solution of ABB?
Yes, thank you. Yes, ABB is a really global company. And as I have already said, we have about 100 representations in the world. And globalization for global company, it's really good stuff. We like globalization. But if you look into reality, that's where we are today, we don't see global tendencies in the regions where we are working. Again, just to be more precise, I come to Caspian region. In the Caspian region, we have quite clear two tendencies of two type of countries which accept globalization and others not so much. For instance, small countries which don't have capacity to produce high-tech equipment, they are quite happy for globalization. They open borders, they invite big market players, and by this they develop competition. And by competition, they have decreasing price level. That's what they want. Look at countries bigger size. For instance, Russia, Kazakhstan, or even Uzbekistan. They don't open completely borders. They're trying to develop some I'm talking about high-tech equipment by themselves, and trying to offer it locally, first of all, and even outside. And by this, of course, the questions of globalizations, accepting them by different way. They don't accept that prices from ABB, for instance, are high, that technologies from ABB are much better than, for instance, in Russia, especially for electrical equipment. And electrical equipment, Russians are quite well developed. That is why global companies have to adapt their policies, global policies, probably to not to each country, but at least to the regions. Today we don't see this a big tendency of globalization everywhere. I would say that if we have capacity to buy products, we have money to buy products, then we are for globalization. If we don't, then we are against of that, because we need to do something by ourselves as well. And for global companies, it's very important to understand this and adapt policies for regions. For instance, ABB opened factories in Russia. They have 6 factories which produce local products, and they already products becoming already not European, local ones. Or we involve local commissioning companies or installation companies for big projects. Also, we use locals to be together. That is, I think, we have to understand on a corporate level that globalization is very important, but the world have to be united, and we have to understand regional politics as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We still have some time, so I would open the floor for our audience asking questions. Be short and be concrete, be short, and not promotion of your event here, because this is the discussion. First, you introduce yourself, where you're from, and quickly your questions and comments, okay?
I have a question for Professor Xiang. My name is Yue Cho. I live in Geneva, where people would consider it a rather dramatic statement to hear what you pronounced the post-WTO era, yes. In your view, is there any way still that we can bring the US back into this multilateral world? We can think about the advantage for the America to go the bilateral way, but the world is also made up by surprises. Sometimes there are unpredictable consequences of that.
To me, the chance is very low because right now with Trump as the president of the United States, and I think after this phase one deal between US-China, it's going to be so difficult to come up with phase number two. And the probability for the relation to further deteriorate is higher than getting better. And because you look at the consensus in the U.S., if you look at the Congress, you know, the leading expert, China expert from the U.S., and many American companies they have invested in China. Some of them have felt, you know, they're not doing well in China market. So some were strong supporter of integration between China-U.S. relations. I think they have switched their stand, you know. So the real pro-China, let's say pro-China, pro-U.S.-China relation group are really the top companies from the U.S. that have invested in China. But some of them have changed their stand. So it's going to be difficult. When China, U.S. have a relation like that, it's going to be virtually impossible to have new round of WTOs, you know. So that's my view. Thank you.
Any questions?
Can I offer some remark on something also we have been doing for the past 6 years, not only the social innovation front, but also what I call economic disruptions. I look at the economy around the globe. The beauty of China's economy for the past 30-some years, we always have new kids on the block, new large-scale companies, new billionaires, okay? If you compare China with India, look at the 10 richest people in India, virtually no change for 20 years. Look at rich people in China. They don't stay as the richest person for more than 2 years, always disrupted by new kids on the block, you know. So that's one key reason why, you know, we started 1978 with like India, China, GDP roughly the same. Now China GDP is 5 times bigger than that of India. Disruptions. If you compare China with Japan, Japan is excellent in innovations, but look at the disruptions. They don't do well. I mean, no new large-scale company merged, no new billionaires. You look at the top 400-some 494 unicorn companies, only 2 coming from Japan. Japan may not do well in the future. So that's the reason why we started this disruption program in China 6 years ago, and we export that to Japan, to Korea, to ASEAN, to Latin America, and to Europe, I hope. Europe also needs that kind of disruptions because you got to give young people a hope. If you don't, you see the problem. in many, including France, my God, I'm so surprised, So whatever, developing economy, liberal democracy, authoritarian, if you don't have that chance giving to young people, I think you could have a flood of social problem to come.
Are there any questions, comments from our audience? I have a question, actually. I have a question. If I bring back the questions in the beginning of introduction, I want to ask every panelist here today, what will be the future picture, very near future and long future? What will be the picture of that? We will have globalization or not? We will have international trade or not? What kind of company we will have? What kind of institution, government we will have?
Thank you. Well, of course we will have globalization, because globalization is driven by technology, by technological development. And this is, I mean, it's not really exogenous, but it's happening. I mean, globalization is driven by communication technology, transportation technology, information technology. I mean, even if governments and societies would be stable, no disruptions, globalization would produce disruptions by the very technology. I mean, it's actually the technology which produces the disruptions. And the main effect, and we like to call it globalization because it's so global a phenomenon and encompassing a phenomenon. But there are developments going on which are more or less independent of policy. I mean, of course, I disregard, it has been mentioned, let's hope there won't be big wars in the future. I mean, of course, this would be disruptions beyond technology. But save for that, I think we will have globalization. Companies will have to face it, and some will do, and they will prosper, some will not, and they will disappear, and especially new ones, I'm sure, will be coming up. I mean, someone said today, we like to think 10 years as rather medium or even long term, but we have to think in much longer terms. And then it's very obvious that there will be new companies, that there will be outgoing companies, and it's impossible to predict in what direction it will go, but it will be probably along the lines of ever more sophisticated technology. And I'm not saying that, how some people do, artificial intelligence will replace the human brain in the end. I don't think so. I mean, I recently read a quote from Pablo Picasso in the 1920s or so, where he said, computers are useless because they can only give answers. I mean, the first part of his remark is not really well taken, but the second part will hold even with the most sophisticated artificial intelligence. It will only be able to give answers. We have to ask the questions.
Well, relating to AI, I think the one key element or potential effect of technology disruption is the possibility the first level distribution of wealth will become unequal. If that's the case, I do see socialism, a strong proactive role of government will come back globally, including China and the US. And then I was not surprised by the rise of Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and that was not the case 10 years ago. Now it's the difference, In terms of globalization, like even we may be in the era post-WTO, this does not mean globalization is ended. It will take a different form. So the bilateral, trilateral, regional deals will be more popular. I see more integration, for example, in the whole region, China, Korea, Japan, and ASEAN. So, so this is going to be more regionalist. And even in the scenario where a war is erected between US, China, and it's more like many years ago, 20 years ago, there's no direct flight between mainland China and Taiwan. What we did, we flew via Hong Kong and Macau. So the traffic will continue. You see flood of Chinese companies making investment in ASEAN countries and Latin American countries. So the global supply chain will be reconfigured. But it's a matter of just cost will be higher. It will be higher cost for the Chinese companies to export to US. It will be more costly for the American company to take advantage of the Chinese market. So I think the traffic will continue. It will be more costly, more regionalism. I mean, it's going to be globalization moving forward, but different format, different form.
Thank you. Now, I want to give it a different angle. Will there be globalization in the future? I say yes. And I want you just to look at some of the multinational companies. And then you might also see what kind of taste that globalization will have. I think the multinational companies are those companies who have been most capable in dealing with all the differences and difficulties of doing cross-border trade. They will continue to be there. They will continue to maneuver these cliffs and rocks and bottoms in the sea, and they will be able to still do trade. It might be not as efficient, but they will do it. But I want you to look at a different angle. When you see the deep belief of any capitalist multinational company, then you would also assume that they, almost by their own laws, would always move to the most efficient tax country with their corporate headquarters. Now they don't. You find out if you look at the world of the multinationals, they don't. But they usually have a hook, or somebody has a hook into them. Then if you further look away from, let's say, the food traders, and maybe just look at the multinational technology company, you might also start to imagine what kind of hook that is. And if you see the argument that the US has brought up against Huawei, you must think deeper and think, why are the Googles, why are the whatever companies, the Microsofts, why are they still based in the US? Why does the US allow them to adapt to a very specific tax regime where they can keep taxable income offshore for such a long time? Why is there this combination? And then you start to see globalization will be a power extension in the future, and more so and more so. It will not be globalization just in per se something good, but it will be an extension of certain power that is localized at the base where these companies are. So to a certain extent, it might be right that we are suspicious of TikTok, but to the other extent, it might also be right that we should be suspicious of other companies. And when you see, you know, Professor Bing was shaking his head over France. Yes, France is a mess, but they try to do some things like taxing some of these multinationals at the base where they make the money. And to a certain extent, this will be what will be happening. Because why do we all expect to deliver our goods? And Professor Zhang said, our goods are our data. Why do we deliver our data freely to all these players and don't collect any taxes against it? So, in short, my answer is yes, there will remain globalization, but it will have a certain national flavor to it. Thank you.
I think 5 years from now, the environmental economy would have taken, in earnest, central stage. I think we would see an expansion, a massive expansion of the circular economy because of AI, machine learning. We would see new models of engagement. So we will see environmental innovation, and that would add a lot to the value chain. So I don't see that as all these measures as leading to a more expensive economy. The shift will be quite painful for many established groups around the world with vested interests. The other thing I see, which is very interesting, is I've been spending the last couple of years advising millennials. I'm humbled by their energy and their vision, the set of values, their views on risk and return, very different from what we're used to, and also the Gen Zs. And I see cross-generational divide, stronger than before, empowered more by social media. Don't forget, in some countries, social media is really the news feed and not the national newspaper. So you can forget about fake news or real news. The social media platform, that's the thing. And that is promising, but it will also have its negative consequences as well, as all this energy, this massive energy rushes out. And that's how I would predict the
Thank
next
you.
5 to
You
10
mentioned
years.
about the next generation. Our student in the university, as well as a student from the base education, they clearly mentioned that in the future, there won't be nation, there won't be companies, there won't be government, because everything will be transparent. So maybe we guys sitting here representing older generation, we're talking about our sweet dreams about the future, and then if we invite people from the really next generation, they will laugh about us, thinking that, hey, what are you guys talking about? In the future, everyone, because of the data, your own data, you represent yourself. There won't be companies, there won't be organizations. I'm just passing the message. It's a little bit stressful when I heard about this, but it's also very much inspiring to see that the next generation combining with the technology, they are not afraid of what we already messed up. They have their own solution. And then their solution is cut it clear. And then they start from the scratch. That's only what I'm thinking and what I got from the university and the basic education. Maybe, Igor, you have something from the ABB experience.
First of all, I would like to remember the phrase that technology will drive globalization. Yes, I agree with this, but first of all, just partly, because I think the political power of big countries will make a big impact in globalization. Because we see today that, first of all, politics on place, and secondly, economy together with globalization. Of course, it will be connected very much with the big countries, and they have to play own role in the world. And if they decide that they need to develop some kind of national type of technology or do own products, I don't think that anything will stop them to do it. That is why for global companies like ABB, we have this in mind, and we are always in cooperation with governments. We understand that some local technical features or anything else is important for them, and we need to have a certain combination between globalization and nationalism, if you like. That we have to have in mind.
Professor Xiang, you have, yeah.
I'm not a technology expert, but I see this recent incident about Huawei got me really concerned. I did a lot of training for Ericsson in 1990s, Nokia, then many Alcatel, many, Motorola as well. And then Huawei was one of the 4 major telecom providers in China, one and only private company. Huawei was discriminated in China because it was private. We have 4 major companies: Ju, Da, Zhonghua, Giant, Datang, Huawei, and this Zhongxing. So one reason Huawei went global, partly because Huawei was private, did not get kind of deals they wanted, so sort of pushed out to market outside of China. And I still remember Cisco used to have 75% of China's internet infrastructure market. 75%. You see the dominance of Cisco, Oracle, Intel, IBM. Why China does not have a security concern? Give me a break, okay. I mean, maybe there's a security concern for Huawei products. I think the best way moving forward is more like international accounting standard. I'm an accounting background, is it possible to have an international accounting standard on security issues for Huawei product, for Cisco product, for Intel product, for Ericsson product? That's the best way moving forward. Current way is definitely not a good way. I'm not a technology guy. I just want to propose some possible solution to all this kind of argument. You see the dominance American company in China. You can easily make an argument of potential security risk American product in China as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The time is running up, so I have to quickly close up this session. First, thank you very much for joining here and contribute to this panel discussion. We're also very grateful all our panelists very generously giving their opinions and then their thoughts to this currently 4 paradoxical forces in the world. Really is something we should take home and think about it, talking with our children. Secondly, we also hope that in the next year and also coming year, we hope we have a free discussion, communication at this platform, this Untitled Global Forum collaborating with Caspian Week. So you are very welcome to send our email, calling us. Our information easily found on the www.igforum.org, where is a platform contributing to sustainability and intelligence. It's connecting to university, connecting to business school, connecting to the legal system, connecting to cross-continental organizations, government as well. So if you have any good thoughts, any good insight you want to express, you are very welcome to contact us. You can contact me directly. You can also contact Urs Lustenberger in Switzerland. Anyways, we hope to see you next year, either in Davos or in Zurich or in another corner of the world. I wish you a pleasant week here. Thank you.
Thank you.